Well, Joel, thank you so much for coming along today for this interview as we discuss existential ideas in what I hope will be a slightly more accessible and perhaps less academic way. So, I met you at your amazing IMEC International Meaning conferences, and I know that you're also a lecturer, you're a researcher, a philosopher, an activist. But for those who don't know you, how would you introduce yourself briefly?
How I would introduce myself? Well, I'm just Joel, and because the thing is, all those titles they may sound very interesting, but I'm always personally always more interested in how people live, and so yeah, people need to get to know me, what I stand for, who I am, and what I do. I think that that's more important.
Amazing. And I'm sure hopefully over the course of this interview, they might get to know you a little bit
I hope
better.
so. Yeah.
Yeah. So really as the point of this is to explore what existential ideas are, a good place to start might be how would you describe them? How would you describe existentialism?
Yeah, that's always the big question. And quite literally, it's a big question. Because when we talk about existence, and because there's that word existence in that word existentialism, existence is usually translated as life. So it's about our life in general. It's not about those tiny, small activities that we do in our daily lives, our daily life worries, like our worries over the grocery shopping that we need to do, um, or like our stress about some examinations that are coming up. No, existentialism is about life in general. So from birth until death, like when you take that full perspective, how do you then look at your life? So it's a much, much larger perspective. And I think that that is the core of existentialism. It's widening our perspective, widening our views on ourselves. Um, and now I can also go into a little bit more theoretical or philosophical explanation. And the thing is that there is the philosopher Martin Heidegger, who is often seen as one of the founding fathers of existential philosophy. And he started to use the word existence because he said that the word existence comes from the Latin ex and sistere. Although his explanation about this has been very much criticized by linguists, but I still like Heidegger's explanation. So the word existence has this part that means ex, which means out, and sistre, which means more or less something like standing. So what he's saying is like in our daily lives, we stand at a certain place. So examples of that is that in our daily life, we use many labels. Like you already started by asking, who are you? You started telling all those labels that I may have. Yes, I may have a long list of labels, but whatever labels I use, I will never get to really who I am. So therefore, I was also saying like, I'm always more than whatever label you would use. And also, you know, as being a punk myself, or actually now that I've shaved off my hair, more like a skinhead, I often hear people say that, yeah, that they have certain immediate associations, they have certain labels, connotations with punks or skinheads, where people often think, well, a punk cannot be like a lecturer or like a philosopher. But hey, well, I am. So um, we often stand at a certain place where people see you in a certain way. They give you certain labels. People can also have certain expectations of you. But also, for instance, our parents or our society brings us certain expectations. Like they expect you, yeah, you need to be there or you need to go there in your life. This is where you need to stand. This is where others stand. This is where you should be. And also sometimes we also develop certain habits where we get really stuck in a certain place where we stand in our lives. And it's difficult to get out of there. And also sometimes also our healthcare providers or even our psychotherapists, they are sometimes putting us in a certain place. And they're saying, well, you are an extrovert or you are depressed, you are this or that. So they put you at a certain place to stand there. However, Heidegger said, well, being alive, existing, that always means not only standing somewhere, but also being outside of there. That's the X bit in the word existence. And so, in the first place, that means that I'm not only standing at this place myself, but I'm always embedded. I'm a part of a much wider context, a much wider setting. For instance, like there are other people around me who label me. There are other people with expectations. There's also healthcare services who put pressure on me, or there's politics, there's the economy. So wherever I stand, I always stand in a wider context. Another aspect of it is also that I'm able myself to step out of the place where I am. In the first place, that means that I can step outside of the place where I am standing at this moment, and I look at myself like, wow, why am I standing there? Do I want to stand there? It's a very weird place to actually stand. Why don't I stand over there? That's a much nicer place there. I would like to stand over there. So existence means the ability to step out of the position, the location where we're now standing, get out of there and reflecting and actually being able to change. And sometimes certain places is very difficult to really walk to because our context where we live sometimes forbids us to go to certain places. There are many walls that society has built. And also, for instance, as being a man, I cannot give birth to children. So my body is also limiting my opportunities. So I can change within those parameters, within those limitations that are there. But at least I can always step out, reflect on it, and possibly I can also reflect on myself and think, well, looking at all those different places, some places are unattainable, and some other places I actually don't want to go to. Well, actually, where I am now, this position is quite good. And then I can just stand where I'm standing. But in that case, I've done that while I was having this bigger perspective on my life in general and my context in general. Then I can say, well, I'm okay here. I'm standing at the right place. So, and I own my place. And it's not only that I've ended up at this place because others have pushed me here, or luck, or fate, or life, but no, it's also because I want to be here. And then I make a deliberate decision and I take the responsibility for standing where I stand and using my opportunities, looking at the freedom that I have and the lack of freedom that I have, and making a very conscious decision. And I think that this is what really existentialism is about. It is having that bigger perspective on our lives and always having the opportunity to step outside the place where we are, reflecting on ourselves and changing if we want.
You see, this feels relatable. This feels relatable beyond the realms of textbooks. And this is what sort of inspired me to start this project, because we don't have to be a scholar to understand or explore this sense of we're here, we exist, but we can also reflect on that. And when we reflect in our own time, in our own way, and perhaps through these kind of existential ideas, we're able to explore from different perspectives and make different choices, maybe.
Yeah.
What brought you into this field? What brought existential ideas into your world?
So there are two answers to that. In the first place, you are using the word ideas, existential ideas. But for me, it's much more than just ideas. Because for me, when we talk about existentialism, it's mainly about living, existing. So it's much more about being and doing than necessarily everything being very heady. So whether you're able to read and understand and explain Heidegger in the most perfect way, that doesn't necessarily make you an existentialist. The thing is, I know philosophers who are really perfect in explaining all those difficult texts. But when I look at how they live their life, I'm like, I don't know how much you've really understood existentialism. So for me, it's very much about living as an existentialist. And that's like what I said, looking at your opportunities and taking, your freedom and your opportunities to really live life to the full and live a meaningful life and taking your responsibility in that. And that's does not need to have all the theoretical reflection. And I think that I've always been like a person who has always been um, looking at the status quo. I've always been looking at like all the trends and fashion, and that I'm like very interesting. I really love a lot of stuff. But hey, is that really what I want? Is that really where I should go to? So this has always been my attitude, general in life. Um, so that's very much an attitude. But on the other hand, like the ideas on the more theoretical level, they came in my life actually already like as a young child. So I was writing a lot of poetry as a child. I was writing stories where I was reflecting a lot on the big questions. Even as a young kid, I was already doing that. It also was, I think, stimulated by my family because my father had the books from philosophers like Nietzsche on his bookshelves. And I had a lot of conversations with my father about philosophy, about life in general. So that was very much stimulated. So I grew up almost like in an existential philosophical household, I can say. At the same time, my family was also, Christian, Protestant. And we went to a church which was also very, how to describe it, it's a non-traditional Christian church where it's very much about looking at what does religion really mean to you, and also, so in that sense, a very existential type of religion, almost in the line with Christian existentialists such as Paul Tillich. So as a child, I don't know, of course, I didn't know the profession of becoming a therapist or becoming a researcher. The examples that I had were the Protestant ministers, the priests. So as a kid, that is what I wanted to become. So I wanted to study theology. That was always my idea, to study theology, possibly later get my own community as a priest. But over the years, I really started to realize, well, I'm more interested in the existential teachings that are there in religion, and not necessarily only in like Christianity. And like you can also now see behind me some sculptures of the Buddha and also of the Hindu god Ganesha. So, and actually also of some African people behind me as well. So I've always been interested, like, what are the existential questions that all the big people have been asking already through all the ages, over all the millennia? So then it was very logical in the end that I decided to study both psychology and philosophy. I started studying both at the same time because I knew, psychology helps me to understand like how people respond. But I get it that in psychology we have a lot of models, we have a lot of sometimes simplistic ideas about how people function. Whereas in philosophy, we ask the bigger questions, the questions which are behind those models. Um, so there was a perfect combination, and I can recommend that to everyone. And also interesting that my first lecture in philosophy was actually from a lecturer who would later become my mentor. And the first lecture literally was on Nietzsche. So then I knew, well, I'm here at the right place. Like immediately from the first lectures onwards, we were talking about all the big existential ideas. I came home when I studied Nietzsche, and I was then getting the words for all those ideas that I had already had in my life before as a kid, as the way I was living, the poetry I was writing. And suddenly I saw I'm not a weirdo, or possibly I was, but hey, but I could see how my ideas were reflected also by others. They had similar ideas. And so while I was studying, I didn't really know yet how big the field of, for instance, existential therapy was. Well, then when I was 19 years old, I wrote in my diary at my age of 19 that I want to establish neo-existentialism. And what is that? Neo-existentialism is an integration of evidence-based research, really up-to-date 21st century, combined with the existential teachings and the existential livings, and also with having a community. This was what I decided when I was 19 years old. I was like, this is where I want to go to. I want to dedicate my life into establishing this idea of neo-existentialism. And then it was also very logical that then later, after actually in my master thesis, I focused on a phenomenology of the lived experiences of immigrants. So that means that I was really looking at what are the experiences without taking all those standard models of immigrants and putting that on them. No, really listen to them with an open mindset. It was very fascinating. And then after that, I did my PhD project in cancer patients. Again, I looked at what motivates them, what is really going on, which existential topics are going on there. Because when you have cancer, it really confronts you with yourself. Similar as like those immigrants that I had seen, how immigrating confronts you with yourself. Because you're not only focusing on your daily life anymore, but when you immigrate, your full life changes. Everything changes. So of course you start to look at yourself and at your life from the bigger perspectives of life as such. And similar with cancer, you start to think, okay, possibly I only have a limited time to live. What do I do with that? So this is very much where I saw the importance of existential ideas, of existentialism, and where it's not merely a theory, it's not a philosophy, it's the lived experiences of people in their real lives. And this is what I find very interesting, to start helping people to find new ways to, yeah, how do you do that? How, when you have your daily life and suddenly you start to see the bigger perspective. Sometimes that's difficult to make, yeah, to go back to your daily life because you can be really overwhelmed by those bigger perspectives, by seeing those bigger freedom, the bigger responsibility. That can be very challenging. And there is my doorbell, so I need to go there. That's also why I had the short silence there. But I'll be back soon.
I really appreciate the distinction you've made there between ideas and living, because I find that's often lost. And I also find that that is something that perhaps ostracizes people from entering into this field, exploring these theories, exploring these philosophies, because there are these huge works of literature, like you've mentioned Heidegger, you've mentioned Nietzsche, and their names and their philosophies, and there's a real association with the academic, with the thinking side of things. But the message I receive from your description there is one almost of hope, that it's something that people can apply to their experience regardless of their background, regardless of their interest in textbooks or philosophy books. So thank you so much
Absolutely.
for making that distinction.
Yeah, and that this is also something that I'm personally interested in, is to really look at how do people actually live as existentialists. So, and there are actually two communities which I found who really embody existentialism in that sense. So I've traveled a lot over the world, and I'm always interested in going to tribal communities where the smaller villages, the people there have almost rarely or never met Western people, or who have not read all those big books. And then I'm interested in speaking with those people. How do you live your life? And how do you cope with challenges in your life? And I've been taught so much by actually, for instance, like orphans who live in the street, in Uganda, for instance. Like, I'm thinking one of the most impressive moments that I've had was a conversation I had. I still remember that I was sitting under one of those big baobab trees, the African trees. It was in the afternoon of like a warm summer. Well, it's always warm there. And there were like some of those children who were sitting there with me, and I was talking with them, asking them questions about their life. And I think there were 8 of them, and they must have been like 9, 10 years old. And I asked them actually like questions which were actually very much about existentialism. So I asked them, for instance, like, what makes you actually get out of your bed or from the place where you've been sleeping in the morning? What makes you get up and do stuff? And what motivates you? What drives you? And I was so impressed by that, um, because all those kids, like, the factual situation is horrible. Like, they were really like challenged. Most the parents had died, usually from AIDS, and they had trouble getting food for themselves and their friends, and but the hope that they had, and also the motivation, the drives. So they were like for instance, there was a child, and and he was saying that he was doing this for his sisters. He said, that's so important, I need to take care of them. There was this young girl, and she said, I want to become the first female president of Uganda. Sounds unlikely from as an outsider, but great determination there. So I've learned there that actually we don't need all those materialistic goals or self-oriented ideas we have about what's important in life. But what often drives people are those social and larger types of meanings, things that really, really matter. And those kids, they really understand that. They understand how to live life to the full, even though they are really struggling from an objective perspective. So this has really made me reflect so much on my own ideas and assumptions that I had about, yeah, I need first to have like a good roof over my head. I need to have a good career. I need to have read all those books. I need to be a perfect interpreter of all those existential philosophical books. Only after that, I can possibly have a contribution to society. Only then can I live life to the full. No. Those kids put all those ideas totally upside down. They say, well, first live your life in an existential way, do what's meaningful, and other things may come later. And this, like, is the opposite of the model of Maslow, that's often, yeah, described in a lot of psychology lectures, because he had this pyramid where, like, on the bottom it was saying, like, first you need to have all those materialistic goals, and only later, when you fulfilled all your materialistic needs, you have your food, the shelter, the roof over your head, only after that can you, for instance, start to realizing yourself, having the bigger questions about life. And it appears that this model doesn't work. It does work, but only in Western capitalist countries, but not elsewhere in the world. And this is also what all the research is showing, that this model doesn't work. And so this is a further clear example for me, like, well, actually it is mainly about living in an existential way, not necessarily all having other theories. And the second community that I have become really involved in is the punk community here in London. Originally, I'm from the Netherlands, and in the Netherlands, punk has never been very big, but I've always felt very connected with it. But when I arrived here in London, I felt like, hey, there are more people looking different than I am. And then what I started to realize is how the punk movement has embraced so many existential ideas, because I see the punk movement very much as an existential community. Of course, there's also some rebellion there sometimes, which is more influenced by anti-authoritarian or anti-parent type of motivations. But there is this idea very much about, okay, why should I stay necessarily at that one position where society wants me to stand? Why should I look in the way how society expects me to look? it is very much about embracing the freedom and getting out sometimes of all the conformist ideas about how we should look, how we should behave, what we should do. And actually, they inspired me to think, well, actually, also in my own looks, for instance, for a long time, I've been just looking boring, to be honest. But then I thought, yeah, if I'm teaching all the time with existentialism and I'm telling people to be authentic, to be themselves, to look at the freedom to make some decision in life, why am I not doing that myself? So that is also why I then thought, well, yeah, I need to embrace that. So that's also why I look punk with my piercings, with my different looks, and so I try to embody what I'm teaching. And I know that other people will find examples of existential communities at other places, I'm sure. With the jazz community is another one, or also in reggae communities or hip hop with the original hip hop scene. There's so many places where there are some of those great existential ideas in how people live, in the lifestyles, in the way how people make decisions. And yeah, I think that's great. That's really supporting.
So it's not just living, it's living creatively, it's exploring almost.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so I actually have one motto um, or one slogan that is life is too short to look boring. Um, yeah, and that's what I personally believe. But I get it that for other people it may be necessary. Like, for instance, what I've often have is when I am sitting in the underground in the tube, that quite often people start talking with me, particularly when I'm in my full punk gears with my spikes on, etc. And quite often people say, "Oh, that's so courageous, so cool," and I would love if I could also do that. And I'm still a therapist, even when I'm just in the train. And so I will always return the question, why don't you do that? Because if I can do it, you can do it. And often I hear of stories from people who are saying, yeah, I cannot do that at my job. My employer would expect me to dress in a certain way. And I'm saying, okay, you don't necessarily need to get a mohawk or become like a full skinhead or have weird spikes. But you can punkify your life in a different ways. So you can, for instance, like I'm saying, wear those weird Donald Duck socks. You know, if that is your way of being punk within the system, do so. So it's also one of the things that I intend almost with my looks is I always hope to inspire people to start reflecting on themselves. You know, again, that is helping people to look at themselves, get out from that one position where they're standing and look from my perspective at themselves. Um, that's what I'm trying to do also with my looks. Therefore, like I tried to start a clothing brand even and an art brand that's called Punkify Your Life. Because I really believe in that. I believe that we can punkify your life. And I believe that that is very much an existential attitude. But hey, I get it that for a lot of people, it's a look that doesn't appeal to them. And I'm not saying that everyone should be wearing spikes and having mohawks, because then that will become conformist again. And I would most likely then start wearing like a three-piece suit and a tie, I think. But yeah.
It sounds like the answer to my question here is going to be pretty varied and that it's ever developing. But what from all of these experiences and philosophies, what would you say is your existential offering, as it were?
My existential offering. Yeah, so I think the first thing that I need to say is it's my research. Because this is what I find interesting is like, yes, there are all those great philosophies, but at the same time, what do we really know? What works? What's really the case? Because you can have very nice ideas, but how does that translate into real life? And particularly when you start to use those existential ideas, for instance, for coaching, counseling, or psychotherapy, does it work? And how does it work? So I really have like doing research, and I've done many reviews, systematic reviews of what's research evidence. I've conducted meta-analysis. And so these are analysis of analysis. Um, and a lot of that is reflected in some scientific articles which I've published, but also in this book that you can see here behind me. And that book is actually that I'm really proud of. It's Meaning in Life, an evidence-based handbook for practitioners. Why I'm proud of that is because it combines all those different interests. So I'm using the term meaning in an evidence-based way, and not in this reductionist way like you could see in an Oprah Winfrey show, but it's a broad term that's about doing in your life what really matters, seen from the bigger perspective. So that's much more than like following what others expect you to do, or what has been, yeah, what the magazines are telling, but really like what's truly meaningful for you. And so in this book, I summarize all the research that there's some meaning. And I say, okay, this stuff we know, this matters, and this, like, well, doesn't seem to be really supported. It's a nice theory, but hey, guys, people, no, it doesn't work this way. So, and on the basis of that, I've developed like 10 sessions, like a treatment manual, how therapists can really use that. And in this way, this can be used as a form of training people in beginning coaches, counselors, therapists, priests, human resource managers, anyone who really want to work with meaning in practice. So research is a very important thing for me. The second thing that I really hope that people will also, remember me for, is actually like trying to connect the field of existentialism with the wider society, with politics, with the economy. Um, because I've already mentioned how we are always embedded in a much wider situation. As Heidegger said, being is being in the world. And but what is this world? And how are we in the world? How does the world influence us? And how do we influence the world? And what I've seen often, particularly in some of the existential therapeutic ideas, is that it becomes very much focused on the self. And existentialism can even become sometimes slightly selfish. Like, as long as you make your decisions that are meaningful for you, then everything is fine. Well, I'm not 100% sure about that, because or at least the situation is much more complex. So this is very much what I really hope to do, and I have been doing that for a long time, but also I'm doing more and more. That is to connect the world of research, of existentialism, with politics, with political activism. So I'm also very proud of the other book that has just been released earlier this year on the economics of meaning in life, from capitalist life syndrome to meaning-oriented society. So this is, I think, the first time that someone has really done a systematic analysis of how our society, how our economic and political system influences what we think is meaningful in life. Because quite often we have the idea that our values or our meaning in life, what I see as my personal meaning, I often have the illusion that I've decided it myself. But there's so many subtle and often not so subtle influences of the system, like where I am, where I'm standing at this moment in my life. It's almost always, for a large extent, influenced by society. I've been pushed to go here, the place where I am. And so, and I'm even not aware of that. And I'm even like, when I try to look at it, like, why am I standing here? Do I want to stand here? And quite often, like, society is like trying to hide me from going somewhere else. And I'm investigating all those influences from society on what I think see as meaningful. And I really describe in this book how particularly the modern forms of capitalism, neoliberalism, how that is so much influencing our values in life. How we are very thinking in materialistic terms. And when we think about what's important in life, that too often in Western countries, we think, well, it's my career, it's getting a lot of money, getting all my stuff, buying stuff, or it's about my self-enjoyment or self-development. Whereas like actually those type of values actually are also known to be making people unhappy or even creating some psychological stress or even like some psychological disorders. Whereas like I could also orient myself more on social types of meanings or larger perspectives, like looking at what's ethical, my community, altruism, helping others. And so this is what I call like a meaning oriented society. How can we really go there? How can we build communities and a society where each individual can really determine what's meaningful for them without all those manipulation that's going on from society, but really reflecting on ourselves and making seeing our freedom and taking our responsibility for living a meaningful life. And interestingly enough, we see that the economy is changing, society is changing, because people are becoming more critical of governments. People are making more conscious decisions, for instance, when they buy stuff. It's more conscious consumerism. And this is what I'm calling the meaning oriented society. And this is what I also really hope to actually connect the societal developments and to connect those also with the existential ideas and existential research. But what I also find important is not only to be writing about it. Like I've already mentioned before, like talking about something, having an idea is one, doing it is second. So this is also what the philosopher Karl Marx also said, is how people have and how philosophers have often interpreted the world in many different ways. But now it's really time to change it. And that's also how I see it, also as my responsibility, my ethical responsibility and meaning in life, is to help building those bridges between the beautiful ideas and research in the field of existentialism into daily life of people. And not only of individual clients who I may see in my psychotherapy practice, but also on a larger scale in society. And this is also what I've been doing, actually, together with you, Natalie. That is to create communities, create activities where we help people on a very practical basis to come together, connect with each other, reflect on themselves and their lives. And this is also very much what I hope that we can continue doing, even on larger scales. So, for instance, for already 4 years, I've now that we're doing this interview, I've been organizing IMEC conferences. And these are conferences where we bring people together from literally all over the world, people from different disciplines, where we ask people to talk about questions around meaning, about existence, and how does this work, and what works, what doesn't work in our field. And what I find really important at those conferences is not only to have the big names. Like you always see that at the big academic conferences, you always see the big professor, the Nobel Prize winner, the I don't know. It's great. They're still there at the conferences. However, I usually get rid of all the titles because I want them to be there also as a human being, together with all those other presenters, together with trainees, students, practitioners, activists, people working as practitioners. And they also are presenting their work because we're all together in trying to make the world a better place where people can live a meaningful life, where we can be in a meaning oriented society. And ultimately, we are all in this together, this thing, life, existence. We're all trying to make some sense out of it. And like, I have to deal in my own way with like how I exist in the same way as Nobel Prize winner is also like they also have to look at how they live their life. So we're all in a sense equal. And so I find it important in our activities that we build that equality, the connections, the inspiration, and also knowing that we are not on our own in the way how we build things. And then, of course, we have also been organizing mental health for all groups. That's also part of those IMEC communities. Um, and that's like where we have each week, we have a meeting where we have multiple people coming together, and usually around a certain topic, where someone gives a very brief introduction, a bit theoretical. Then we have discussion on it. And then we usually break out in some smaller groups where we start to talk more personally about how do we actually do that in our daily lives. Because that's again the application, which is so important to talk about that, about how do we do it, but also the connection, the community. That's so important because when being is being in the world, it's also, I'm not on my own. Yes, of course, ultimately it's me who's responsible for my own life, but I can get inspired by you, by someone else, by someone who's totally different from me. And it's by being part of community that I can feel less alone and that can get inspired. And of course, and also we are also organizing some music and art events. Like in the past, I also had a charity that was called Punk for Mental Health, which is now transforming into something much bigger. Because of course, it's much more than only the punk thing. Because I've already described how for me, punk stands for like this existential attitude, for a beautiful community of people. And that's not only there in punk, in many so other subcultures. So that's actually a thing that we're now looking at. How can we build a wider community where we use music and art to express the way how we live our lives, to express some of our values, to build communities, and to raise awareness for mental health. So when you are asking, what do I hope people to really remember me for, or what are the highlights? I'm saying, yeah, it's my research. I hope that I can inspire people to connect existential ideas with politics, wide society. And I also hope that I'm able to connect people with each other and to help people to lift people up in that sense from their own small daily life perspectives to larger networks. I also hope that I can, to a certain extent, be like an inspiration, even like in the way how I live my life, even in my looks, in that people can see, yeah, well, you can actually change your life. Like that Joel, the way how he's doing stuff, yeah, most likely could also do that. Like Joel changes look, why not somewhere else? Why can I not do that? You know? Um, yeah, so these are some of my ideas there.
So it's not just in the way you think about life or live your own life, and it's not just in your research, and it's not just in your writing, but it's also in this IMEC concept that you're contributing this connection between theory and lived. And I'm just wondering,
Absolutely.
for those who haven't heard about IMEC, is this something that welcomes people who are not academics? Is this something for curious
Absolutely.
humans, as it were?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's very much what I find important is the academic world can be so theoretical. The academic world can be so much disconnected from real life sometimes. And yes, possibly at the conferences, they may be slightly more theoretical, but we really want to also have activists there, people who really work in the field. But usually these are already people who have some background professionally. But our other activities, like our weekly groups, our weekly mental health for all groups, they are for anyone. Anyone who just want to connect in an equal way with each other, reflect on how do we live our lives, or for instance, how do we cope with COVID-19? How do we do this thing? And how do this thing live? How do we do that? Um, so that's for like anyone. And like I have not more knowledge or more expertise than someone else in the group, like whoever you are, whatever your background is. You always have something to contribute, or you always have something that you can take away by listening, or just being together. Just being together in a room, that can already be so helpful. And also our music and art events, we really like intend to really get everyone there, anyone who wants to get involved, anyone who wants to enjoy a great night of music, of art, of poetry, of painting. Yeah, anyone can be there. Absolutely.
So there's these different avenues of almost an entrance into the existential ideas. You don't just have to have a professional training.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm wondering what advice you'd give to someone who had, heard this word existential flying about in society, as I've noticed it has been, and was interested to explore the existential field. Someone that never had done so before.
And so you mean like how can people get to
Yeah, kind
know
of.
topics around
Yeah.
existentialism? Yeah, so I think that yeah, there are many ways. In the first place, it can go via culture, via music and art. It's like what I've already mentioned. It's like challenge yourself. So challenge yourself by saying, okay, well, I live here. I stand at this place. This is where I'm currently standing. And like explore other places like around you, other new types of music, new groups of people, literally new places in the world. Um, so they can also like, for instance, like watch some movies that with some existential topics, like the movie The Matrix, which I think is a very existential movie. Or there's a beautiful movie about how do we cope with death, and that's a movie called Departures, which is really really intense and beautiful in such a way. You can get inspired by watching movies, going to music events like creative music and art, which I see as inspiring me on an individual basis to explore what's more than only the place where I'm standing at. So that's like on a daily life basis. Then of course, yeah, you can come to some of our events from IMEC, obviously. um, But then also when you start to think about some reading, for instance, yeah, there's so much that you can read. There are many also accessible books. There's also a book from Cox, which is about how to be an existentialist. I believe that's the title. That can often be like a nice starting point. If you want to know a bit more about psychological therapies, how do you apply existentialism there? Mick Cooper has written a great book about existential therapies. Um, but these are just some examples more to slowly go into the existential fields. But I would say just follow your interest, follow what's meaningful for you, follow your passion, what triggers, and also look at what inspires other people and follow what they're saying. And also be aware that you do not necessarily need to know all those big names, all the big theories to really be an existentialist. You can be an existentialist without having read Heidegger or Sartre or Nietzsche. You can be an existentialist without them. So I really think it's important to follow your passions and really get inspired by existential ideas. Um, and so I also think it's one more suggestion is quite often existentialism focuses very much on people like Sartre or Camus, which are really inspiring and also beautiful authors. But I also think when you get at a certain further level, particularly when you are thinking, yes, I want to make it more like my career or professional, I think it's also important to read a little bit up on phenomenology. So phenomenology is like the methodology that's almost underlying or that started the existential movement. So phenomenology, that means that we want to let the phenomena speak for themselves. So instead of me imposing my ideas on, for instance, meeting you, like and putting my labels onto you when I meet you, instead of that, I say, well, I put those labels temporarily aside. So phenomenology is like the systematic philosophical method that helps us to step outside the point where we're standing and really reflecting on, okay, what really matters. And particularly like in research, this can be so helpful. And I would really suggest mainly when you start to really study or doing some research yourself, possibly as part of a bachelor, master, or a doctorate, do some systematic research and or some systematic reading on phenomenology, because I think that it can inspire you. For instance, there are some good books, for instance, from Spinelli and Hans Kohn and some others, some very good accessible texts on phenomenology that I think can be very helpful. But again, like, you don't necessarily need to know those theories to really be a good existentialist. But I'm saying, like, when you want to scale up and on a more professional level, I think that that can be very helpful. And also, yeah, the last thing I can say is reflecting on yourself, and actually also reflexivity are very important. So self-reflection means very much that you look on yourself, where am I standing? And reflexivity it goes even further. That looks at myself in my wider context. How do I influence my context? How does the context influence me? And what's the dynamics there, etc. So I really think it can be very helpful to be a reflective and reflexive person, and that you really look at, that you always try to get that bigger perspective. Like what I've said, like, existentialism is about existence. It's about using that bigger perspective of life, and not only having the narrow perspective of my daily life worries and concerns, but no, having a bigger perspective. And sometimes it can help to talk with others, to talk with, for instance, also with personal therapists for your own development, or to go to some philosophy lectures, to watch some YouTube movies or some TED talks, just to help yourself reflect on yourself and how you are standing in the wider context, and not only in a theoretical way, but also in a personal way. So use a diary in where you write down some of your reflections and your reflexivity. Use a diary, but also, for instance, possibly do some meditation or mindfulness type of exercises, where you are not only thinking, but also feeling much more, and using your full body, or actually being your body, or the philosopher Merleau-Ponty would say, be your flesh, be in the flesh, be flesh. So use your full body instead of only, like, using your brain, because to really get that existential message of the existential text is something that you need to do with your intuition, with your gut feelings, with everything, with every fiber of your body. So yeah, that's more or less what I would recommend.
It feels less scary when you describe it like that. It feels that the existential philosophical world is not just this huge jump off a cliff into somewhere really intense and complicated, but you've got the option to really just dabble your way in, and then just slightly, it seems like it's about exploring, and it seems like that can start just with yourself, with your body, with your reflection, with your curiosity.
Absolutely. It all starts with curiosity, because this is very much, yeah, so actually, like, that's what phenomenology is. So Heidegger, sorry again, Heidegger, he was talking about 3 different steps that you can do in the phenomenological method. And he actually was inspired by those 3 steps by his predecessor Husserl, and Husserl was inspired by Nietzsche. Nietzsche was inspired by, we go back to even like the Middle Ages, to people like Meister Eckhart, who, yeah, in mystics, they already were talking about 3 steps that you need to do. And the first step is always the step of, yeah, looking in the right direction and using your gut feeling. So, and using your passion. So if you feel, hey, something is calling there in the distance, I don't know what it is, but something is calling me, follow that call, and follow your interest, follow your curiosity, because most likely there's something for you to work on that. But also in a negative way, if you are feeling like, hey, yeah, life is quite okay, objectively speaking, but there's something in my life, I'm not totally sure, there's something not totally perfect, some discomfort, it's not perfect, yeah, there's not objectively, I don't have like a psychiatric disorder or something like that, but this is still not it. Wow, if you have such a feeling, that's such a gift, So follow that, because that is telling you something about there's more than that one position where you're now standing. Because curiosity, and also this feeling that this place, that there's more than the place where you are. They're all about explore your wider surroundings, the context where you are standing. And so that's always the first step that the mystics did, that Husserl did, that Heidegger did. They say that's the first step. Like, do not only focus on your daily life, but have a much wider focus and listen to all those different calls. The call from your curiosity, the call from your dissatisfaction, your discomfort. Follow that. And that's very much listen to your gut feelings, listen to your intuition, or listen to your dreams, listen to your unconscious. All those can come in so many different ways. That's the first step. The second step that I say is you really need to kind of start to look quite critically at yourself and put aside the things that are not meaningful, stuff that is like imposed onto you by others, like the ideas, the stories from the big books. Now, put them aside and listen to yourself, like, what matters to me? What is really true when I go inside myself and really listen to myself and not necessarily focus on what others have told me how I should think, feel, or behave. But when I really intuitively explore where I'm standing and the context where I'm standing, my opportunities, my freedoms, my responsibilities, when I really engage with that, while I'm putting all those ideas from others temporarily aside, how can they, what is it that's going on there? And then finally, the third step is very much about after we have opened our eyes for the calls that can come from so many different directions. And after we have put all those ideas and influences aside that are not helpful or that are not meaningful, after that is very much also an openness because, and just just be willing to discover something new, and also so something that you may not have expected. That's what I've often had when I've been doing stuff in my life, when I made decisions in this intuitive way. Sometimes it brought me places where I was like, oh, really? Didn't expect that. Or also with stuff that I read. Sometimes I read books that I thought, I wouldn't like this. And suddenly I was like, wow. But I can get wowed. I can get surprised. I can get a deeper understanding because I temporarily set aside all my ideas, all my assumptions, and I just let it speak for itself. And that's what happens at this third stage, is that those existential topics, the themes, what really matters, can start to reveal itself. It will speak for itself. Well, that really is important, to have this openness, this willingness. And that is very brave, very courageous. That's what those existential philosophers are saying. They call that be courageous. And this having the courage to say, yeah, I put aside all those ideas that I had myself, the labels that people gave me, or the labels that I gave myself. I put those temporarily aside, and I take the courage to just be open and let something new emerge. And I think that can be really beautiful.
Are there times that these ideas have really helped you through life? Because I know that you've mentioned therapies and how these ideas, you've touched on that, but how can they help other people's well-being, and have they ever helped yours?
Yeah, so I think I can say viruses, pandemics, or epidemics. I'll explain that for myself and then for wider society. So I think it was something like 2006 when I went to Ghana, where I helped to set up a socio-economic developmental project. What happened was that all the men in the village, including me, who happened to be there, we became ill. And the local doctors, they were saying, well, it's just malaria. Well, okay, malaria can be really horrible, but in principle, that you don't need to die from it if you get the right treatment. But I thought, no, this is not it, because it actually became like very severe encephalitis, so very strong headaches, and in the end, like the full brain gets infected. So when I came home again, I went to the specialist, to the virologists, and they were saying like, well, Joel, you have three options. You have the option you die. The second option is we can give you chemotherapy. We don't know whether it works, but yeah, let's do something. Let's kill everything in your body and let's see whether that works. Option number three is that you cure in a natural way, and that's just magic. So in the end, I chose the third option. Of course, I didn't choose it. It was my body, and to a certain extent, I was lucky. But it was a psychological process, like because I was confronted very much with uncertainty. Like either could mean nothing, I could like be totally healthy, but it could also be that I could actually die. So I was there at a point like, okay, what do I do with this? And then I was really reflecting on a lot of the existential readings that I had done. And one of the things that I'd learned is how not to run away from those existential questions. So, because that's very much what therapists are saying, that is what research is saying, that's also what philosophers are saying, is like when those existential questions come, when you are confronted with your own limits, when you're confronted with your own mortality, don't run away for it. Because what happened was, of course, I was under high pressure psychologically. You understand that? Like when you get a message like that from your doctor, ooh, suddenly from being a healthy person to a person who can die. Wow. So I was under high tension. But the tension actually disappeared when I said, okay, I'm just going to explore my feelings. How do I feel about dying? And so I was also saying, yeah, of course I'm afraid to die. And then I started to look what is really going on there. Why am I afraid of dying? Why? And then I realized, yeah, actually I'm just much too young. There's so many more things that I want to do. So I then started to also look at, okay, even if I have limited time, what can I still do to live a meaningful life? What's the legacy? What can I leave behind in a positive sense? What can I still do? Possibly if I only have months to live, what can I do? So what I did is, on the one hand, I accepted the limitations and the challenges of the situation. And in the end, we're always challenged and we're always limited in life because all of us will die. All of us will, at a certain point, become sick. Um, and on the other hand, I also said, well, I don't, I don't want to let all that existential shit really get me down. No, I want to give a meaningful answer and look here and now. What can I do to give a meaningful answer and actually live a meaningful life in spite of knowing those challenges and those limitations? And fortunately, like what I said, I recovered and fortunately, and I don't have any limiting symptoms remaining after that. But this experience has also helped me. So because when COVID-19 started, the pandemic, I was almost like, yeah, people, why are you so stressed about it? Yes, of course, that's the medical aspect. And I'm saying, yeah, we really, really need to be very careful and we need to be sensible in the protective personal measures we take. And we need to quarantine when needed, when possible, etc. Absolutely. But sometimes I've seen some people, particularly some politicians, in big panic. And I'm like, why is that? Where does that come from? So I've been very much like, of course, I brought my own life experience with it. My existential learnings. That's how I look at it. And also a lot of my own research, also when I worked with cancer patients, when I worked with immigrants, but also for myself when I was confronted with this epidemic. There were so many uncertainties because, like, my own doctor told me, you can die, chemotherapy, or natural miracle. And that's also during COVID-19 for many people, we're confronted with so many uncertainties. The scientists, they don't know a lot of stuff. There's so many uncertainties, so many doubts about the data that's collected, the figures we hear about the infection rates and mortality. And actually, we don't precisely know what works because never before has there been any nationwide lockdowns to stop a virus. Actually, before the pandemic happened, the WHO was actually saying, let's not do any quarantines or lockdowns when there is going to be a big pandemic. So surprising that we suddenly try out something new. So we are totally in new, unexplored territories. And what I see is that a lot of people translate those uncertainties into certainties. Like some people are saying, well, let's be very rigid and say, yes, we're all going to die. It's a big threat, it's a big panic, and we need to do the best of the best. We need to be very, very rigid and very almost obsessive. We need to buy all the toilet rolls that are there in the stores, almost that kind of very rigid, obsessive, compulsive type of panic. And so almost as if the uncertainties, like we don't know how things are going to be. We don't know how long lockdowns last. We don't know how many people will be infected, etc. We don't know. But they translate it almost as if there's a worst case scenario. And then there are others who are saying, well, there's nothing going on at all. It's all fake news. So let's not take any sensible measures there because that's all fake. It's just a way of the state to control us. That's again creating a certainty which is not there, because life often brings those gray situations. It's in all gray tones. It's not black or white. And so this is really what I've also learned myself. It's like when I was confronted with the uncertainty, it's like, yes, we may want to prepare for the worst, but at the same time, it's also important to recognize those uncertainties and to also say, well, let's not translate it into certainties that are not really there. And how can we live with uncertainties? And that's the big existential question that's really underlining all of this. It's like, how can we live with the uncertainties that are there? The uncertainties of illness, health, and death, but also the societal, the economic uncertainties, the political uncertainties. How do we live with that? And to really help people with this, we've set up the Mental Health for All groups, where, of course, we were already running some groups before, but now our weekly events have been very much focused on how to actually deal with this situation, but also trying not to go into any black or white answers, but looking at what's reality and how can we live with that, and like how can we cope with that in a personal level. And yeah, so I think that these are some ways how existential ideas can help us. It can help us to cope with existential threats, with existential uncertainties, with the challenges that politics bring. It's really like saying, yes, I may want to be translating those uncertainties or all the political narratives, even the mind manipulation for economic and political reasons. Um, I'm just very, in that sense, I put them temporarily aside and I remain open for what reality brings, what uncertainties that I'm facing in life. And in that sense, be in the here and now. And also important is in that process of coping with uncertainty, not only finding meaning by in myself, but also finding meaning by relating to others, connecting with others. Of course, we mean people may need to be in an individual physical distancing and physical lockdown, um, because we may not want to have the virus spreading from person to person, particularly if there are vulnerable individuals involved. But this physical distancing and the physical quarantine doesn't mean that we also will need to quarantine our mind and that we need to quarantine our hearts. The opposite is true, I think. The more we quarantine in a physical way, the more we need to quarantine in a social way. And the more we need to, or actually we should not quarantine, sorry, our minds. We should not quarantine our hearts. Um, and that's very much what we've been doing in those groups to actually connect with others. And if you cannot, for instance, join us in our groups, like I think people who are watching this, they can also find their own ways of finding connections during pandemics, but also with any other boundary situation in life. So situation in life where we're confronted, where we come at the boundary of our usual way of living, of our way of understanding, and how in those boundary situations, like where it's important to actually then find some meaningful answers, find some support from others.
So much like exploring the philosophies, even without a background in existential philosophy or theory or ideas, these concepts can still be very valuable to people's well-being, regardless of
Very.
background. They can, even just from a position of self-reflection, they can start to explore, and then, like you've said, perhaps get involved and sit with these uncertainties, face life on, and be able to
Absolutely.
connect with other people as well.
Absolutely. And this is also what research is very much showing. And I was already saying how, yeah, one of my personal meanings in life is connecting research with those existential ideas. And what you were just saying is backed up by so much research, because it really shows that people who are able to live a meaningful life, and also people who are able to tolerate uncertainty, those individuals often experience life as less stressful and as more satisfying than people who have difficulties in finding meaning in life, or people who find it difficult to accept those uncertainties or face uncertainties. So what we really see is that trying to find meaning in life, or reflecting on it, and trying to explore uncertainties instead of pushing them away, actually we've seen, and also then also trying to find social support, we see that those aspects are so important, really important, um, yeah, sources for our mental health, our mental well-being. um, and also we know that, for instance, psychotherapies and counseling and coaching that explicitly addresses the bigger questions in life, that they are very effective. They can really help people to live a more meaningful life. They can help people to cope with life challenges. They can ultimately also reduce the psychological stress that we may experience in life, and they may even improve, for instance, like our physical well-being, and even they reduce blood pressure. They reduce and they improve our immune system functioning. Um, so we really see that, in that sense, meaning in life, it can be quite important. When you use the word meaning in life, I'm not saying that you need to find one answer that will be always your answer. No, no, no. What I'm saying is, like, live a meaningful life, live meaningfully. So for me, I actually I hate the word meaning. Actually, a particular meaning, the meaning of life in capital letters, as a noun. That's horrible. For me, it's an adjective. It's like, how do you call that, present particle? So very much about, like, living a meaningful life. It's doing, it's being. And while you're doing and being and experiencing, at the same time recognizing those existential themes, the challenges that are there, facing the realities and not pushing them away, like accepting that life, that there are uncertainties, that there are limitations, and that we are frustrated in life. It's part of life. But despite of all those challenges, despite of all our frustrations, despite of that, we are always able to find some individual ways to live a meaningful life.
Thank you so much, Joel. And I think this interview, as informative as it is, it's also such a good, tangible example of how this meaningful experience of life can also be so diverse and so personal and so unique. And for those interested to, dabbling into these existential ideas can be a brilliant opportunity to explore that curiosity.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for offering me the opportunity to share my existential ideas, and my existential way of living. Thank you very much for that.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.